Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Spectrum Report. Today's guest is one that you don't want to miss. If you have a child on or off the spectrum who you are considering therapy for or is already in therapy, there are some very important points that we're going to make today. So you're not going to want to miss this episode. So stick around. All right. As I mentioned, we have a great guest for you today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Gabriel Williams, and I'm the CEO of Spectrum Research Group. We are the makers of a product by the name Neural Balance with Anandinol. Was originally created for kids on the autism spectrum, but we find that it helps with calm, focus, and sleep for folks across the board. Kids and adults on and off the spectrum. You can learn more about it by going to neuralbalance.com and checking out the How It Works tab. Of course, you can find us on Facebook. And if you'd like to speak with other parents about their experience or just offer some support and tips to one another, you can check out our Facebook group. And of course, we have a Rumble channel as well, which we upload all our videos to, because we've already had some of them taken off of YouTube and Facebook. So we want to make sure that we have this great content for you available there as well. So head on over to Rumble and look up the Spectrum Report Uncensored for that content. Today's guest is Pamela Garfield-Jaeger, Garfield like the cat, and Jaeger like Jägermeister. So she's known as the truthful therapist. Pamela stepped out of anonymity in 2022 to help parents navigate the flawed mental health system. Pamela has been featured in 3 documentaries that give an alternate perspective on gender affirmative care. Pamela graduated from Ithaca College in 1996 with a sociology degree and earned a dual master's degree of social work and public administration from New York University in 1999. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Pamela to the show. How are you?
Hi there. I love that, how you knew how to describe my last name. That's how I say it.
I've been listening to your other podcasts.
Yes. I was called Odie when I was young because
Oh, that's funny.
Garfield. Yes.
So I thank you for being here today. This is a very important subject. We see this problem, phenomenon, whatever you want to call it, just growing exponentially. In your book, you have even a chart that shows that this just took such a big, sudden leap after COVID. So tell us a little bit about your background, why you're doing what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I've done lots of mental health work in private practice and then in hospitals and group homes, in programs, in the foster care system. So I have all this breadth of experience. And I started to go public because I actually went through this disability where I was out of my profession for a while, came back, and everything was just so radically different that it was hard for me to stay quiet. I also was kind of thrown in the mix of the COVID mandates, and I had been through this really big health crisis. So I just wasn't prepared to take the thing that they were mandating. So I chose to let go of my job that I had finally gotten back to and step out and say the things that I know my colleagues agreed with. Many of them agreed with, but they were afraid to say because of cancel culture.
I can relate to that. As we were talking about a few minutes ago, this is the first time that we've really jumped into a subject that is this controversial, although I don't think it should be, because I mean, I'm hearing about people doing the same thing you're doing, getting death threats and being doxxed and all this crazy stuff. And we're just out here trying to help people, protect children, help families, and so I don't understand why it's become such a political subject and why it's been met with such vitriol. I mean, I thought that protecting kids was always a given. That was something that we all wanted to do. So
Right.
it's kind of strange that we've been met with such resistance. But honestly, listening to folks like you has given me the courage to start, reaching out to people like you so that we can let our viewers and the people who use our product see what's going on out there and be prepared for it. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, it's hard because I'm often labeled as a bigot or anti-trans or anti-something. And what I really am is probably the bleeding heart liberal that I always was. It just really cares about kids. And I learned the truth about how this is harmful and how it's dividing families. And it's not the rainbows and sunshine and glitter that the marketing and the flags and the parades lead you to believe it is. So, only a few people, I think, are controlling what we really see about this. And then I know there are a lot of people like me that were saying the truth, but they've all been heavily silenced. But now we're breaking through a little more, which is good.
Well, and one of the things that concerns me is the fact that the government and medical boards and the powers that be are getting on board with this. I mean, you see what's happening in Canada. Uh, you can, now they're pushing a bill that you can go to jail for what they call hate speech. We see Dr. Jordan Peterson, who's done great work for a long time, helping a lot of people unable to practice, and that's a story we hear a lot in the U.S. It's cancel culture. It's people going after the therapists or whatever and causing them to lose their profession. But in Canada, it's actually the medical board that is doing this. So that's something that kind of blows my mind. I'm a child of the 80s, and I remember when we'd come home from school and there'd be an after school special warning us about anorexia, right? And can you imagine taking your daughter to a therapist and she's 30 pounds underweight and the therapist says, "You're right, you are fat, and here, I'm going to give you some diet pills, and if that doesn't work and that doesn't make you feel like a whole person, then we're going to have your stomach stapled, so we'll go ahead and set up the surgery." And then you go, "Wait a minute, she's already underweight, she's not fat." And then they work with the powers that be to take your daughter and send her to another state to receive this anorexia affirming. It's insane to me, the length that the the medical community and governments are going to affirm this, that is something that most kids are going to grow out of through puberty. So can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's even worse because not only are they affirming it, they're telling them that this is their true self. So if you were using that analogy, if the girl lost the 30 pounds or more and became her anorexic self, that would be her true self if you went by the analogy. But the queer activists, the trans activists, they wouldn't agree with that analogy because they see this as a human rights issue. They don't see it as a mental health issue. They think it's something inherently that you're born with, that you're born in the wrong body, as opposed to it being a psychological issue or something that you can grow out of, or something that you might be influenced by the internet or your peer group, and lots of flags around in your school and your teacher rewarding this new identity. They kind of just overlook all of those influences, and they see it as a like a human rights issue instead. So that's where the blind spot is. And
Mm.
then really what's happened is a small group of activists have really over time, this isn't happened overnight, just feels like it. They over time have taken over these institutions. And so that's why we're here today. They've been working on this for quite a while. And unfortunately Canada is a cautionary tale.
So is it that they plotted over time to put enough people in place that they could then start creating these different boundaries and undoing the work that was done before to protect people. So it wasn't that, like you said, that it just happened overnight, but to us, it happened overnight because
Right.
we saw the results of it, but it's something that they've been working towards for quite some time.
Yes, it's been going
Hmm.
on for a while because there were people even in so there's WPATH, they're the World Professional Transgender Health Organization, and, honestly, they're completely corrupt. There's a new report out called the WPATH Files, which you and your audience should look at, and it will show just how awful and corrupt they are. They've never been great, to be honest, but they've just gotten worse over time. But there were people, I think, that had some ethics that had spoken out, and they were all taken out. They were canceled. There was even it's a trans woman, a man named Erica, who was the president of WPATH for, I believe, 2 years, who said, "I don't agree with this, especially with the children."
Children, right?
And Erica was taken out, canceled, and is silenced. I mean, speaking out on alternative media, but no longer has a voice in WPATH, which is the people that they say are the experts on this. I think they're just a group of activists that are that appear as though they're experts, but they're not.
And that's you talk about Erica in your book a
Oh,
little
I
bit.
do.
I
Yeah, I
did,
forget
yeah.
what I wrote now.
Yeah, I did. So it was funny timing. So the thing that caused me to finally reach out to you was I saw one of your I'm freezing up again. I saw one of your Instagram posts where you asked the question, is um, gender affirming surgery just another form of self-harm? And you had a picture of a giddy and crazy mom just so happy over her daughter who had just had her breast removed, top surgery, but she had scars all over her from where she had been cutting.
And some of them were
And
fresh too.
I never really put that together before, but that's like the ultimate self-harm, self-mutilation.
It
I'm
is.
unhappy. Right. So when did you start to see that as a connection?
When I guess once I started looking into it more closely, it's not even just the surgeries that's a form of self-harm. Injecting the hormones is also seen as as self-harm. I've talked to people who they call themselves detransitioners, people who used to be trans. There's this one woman who I quoted in that book. She was trans for almost 10 years, and she was telling me how she felt like every time she injected herself, it was a form of kind of masochism because it was very painful and she knew she was hurting her body, but because of the self-hatred that she was struggling with, like she wanted to keep doing it until it kind of really hit her what she was doing. So the whole thing is self-harm because you're basically taking your body and destroying its health. And I never really thought about it like that either until like I started to get to know people who were in it on the inside to explain it to me in that way and to see that, but that is what it is, and there are a lot of people, and if you look online at people who would still say they're trans or people who used to be trans, a lot of them have very visible self-harm scars because a lot of times people self-harm because they've had some kind of severe trauma in their past, and that's how they're coping, like, unhealth in an unhealthy manner. But the trans thing, instead of addressing that pain and help teaching them how to stop that behavior, it just reinforces a new way of self-harm.
Mm. And you mentioned there, so there are two things that are related that you mentioned. You said the social activists will say you're born that way, but you're not, and that it's often triggered by some type of trauma.
Yes.
And then, as we know, then once they start to talk about that online with people in that community, then they're affirmed of that. So, one of the things you mentioned in your book is um, you're not born in the wrong body. Is anyone born in the wrong body? So what is it that makes them think that? Is it a kind of a hatred because of some trauma that they've experienced?
Oh, that well, what makes them think of it? And that's a complex answer because I think part of it is this almost religious belief that you're they've been kind of conditioned to believe that, and they see a lot of messaging to, I believe, trick them to believe that they're born in the wrong body, and they quite frankly feel that emotion. It feels very personal to them that they're mismatched with their bodies. So, it often, when they go through the trans procedures, take hormones or get the surgeries, they do feel, oftentimes they do feel a sense of relief. So then that can reinforce it too. Like you feel relieved. Oh, I've done this, and now I feel better, because really you're running away from the pain that you were experiencing. And oftentimes it takes a long time to catch up with you. And sometimes it doesn't catch up because, there's that whole sunk cost fallacy, right? Where if you've really invested that much in it, literally chopping up your body,
Right.
it's hard to admit that maybe you did this for other reasons, like
Right.
trauma or, other psychological issues.
And once you do something that's irreversible, it's, what do you do then?
Yeah.
You admit it was maybe not a good idea, but you can't reverse that. It's you have this permanent injury. And from what I've been reading, like it's very dangerous, whether you're going from male to female or female to male. There are a lifetime of problems that go along with that infection and
Yes.
maintenance and all of that.
That
It
was
just breaks my heart to think that kids are subjected to that.
that was the thing that really got to me, because I thought, honestly, there was maybe a small section of people who, I don't know if they were born in the wrong body, or maybe, and I still can't even say because I can't read everyone's minds, but like maybe this is okay for some small amount of people. But when I thought that, I did not know just how harmful, how risky and difficult these procedures are. Like, even if you decide to be trans your entire life, you are facing severe health consequences. You will be in pain. You will most it depends on which surgery you get, but you'll most likely not be able to have a normal sexual function. Um, the hormones are super damaging. Like, when I read more about the testosterone and how it harms young women, it basically sends them into like a chemically induced menopause. I never thought about it like that. That it's sort of marketed to them like they're going through their second puberty and they're turning into a man. Well, no, they're not. They're going through a chemically induced menopause, and they're usually having hot flashes and sweats, and they're uncomfortable, and they have a weird sex drive that might send them to do risky behaviors, and have do a lot things that actually add to their feelings of shame. And
Mm,
there's this, and a lot of psychological issues. In the beginning of the book, I talk about this 1D transitioner who, her, like, one of the biggest things that harmed her was less physical but psychological, where she was having severe like suicidal behaviors and thoughts and self-harm, to the point where she had to be hospitalized several times, and she went in and out of these psychological hospitals over a course of at least a year, maybe two, like several times. And not once did any of the professionals wonder if maybe it's the testosterone, this potent substance that's, we all used to know that causes roid rage and all kinds of
right.
psychological issues in the past. I mean, we knew that when people were using it for weightlifting, but for some reason we're not thinking about it now. And she went through all of those psych wards, and nobody questioned the testosterone. They just kept putting her on more psychotropic medications. And then as soon as she realized she stopped taking the testosterone, she became stable again, and she no longer needed those medications. She realized just how negligent the health field, the mental health field was. And that's what actually really hit my gut, because I met a girl that went through something very similar, and then I felt like I was responsible and I needed to speak up.
Mm. And I think I've some of the people that are speaking out went through the same thing. Like I said, the first time I heard about you was about a year ago, and you were on. Um, you think you're some kind of therapist
Yeah,
podcast,
there's some kind of therapist,
some kind of
Stephanie
therapist, right?
Wynn.
And
I'm actually about to be we did another interview a few weeks ago. She's gonna release again
Oh, okay,
as
cool.
a
I'll have
group.
to make sure I
Yeah.
listen to that. But that was one of the things that kind of struck me, is you and she are kind of coming at it from a like, hey, we once thought this was not so bad and we
Mm,
wanted to help people. And then you started with your own eyes seeing the harm that it was causing. And you said, I can't be a part of that. And for some reason, that just, we've lost that sense of right and wrong, that we can admit that we took part in something that was not good for these folks, and we want to try to undo that and help other people who are struggling. So I definitely appreciate and commend you, for changing, and Stephanie as well. And I've heard of others who are now speaking out, who, were, I even heard one lady say, I was a big part of the problem, I was all for this.
yeah,
And
Jamie Reed,
then,
is that who you're thinking of?
say
Uh,
the name again.
Jamie Reed, she's the whistleblower
Oh,
from,
yeah,
I think, Missouri. She
right.
was actually in a gender clinic, and
Yes.
she's
That
very outspoken.
you're right.
She's actually about to be on Dr. Phil and
Oh,
early
wow.
April. So, and she'll be telling her story, and she's had to eat a large slice of humble pie, just like I have, right? Like, we have had to do that. We were our empathy was weaponized. We thought we were doing the right thing, and we figured it out that actually we were manipulated. In a way, I see a lot of therapists and mental health social workers, especially, as kind of agents of this harm. I think there are certain people that know this is harmful, and they're tricking us, little nice people, to do their evil doings. So,
Well, and I think you mentioned that in one of the recent podcasts I listened to you on. Most of the people that are involved in this don't mean any harm. They think they're doing well, and as often is the case, you have a handful of people who are doing it for whatever, whether it's power, perversion, money, whatever the case is. I think I heard, Joe Rogan, talking, I think Abigail Shriver, some of these surgeries run around $70,000, right? So for a single surgery.
it's a
So
lot of money.
yeah, it's a big money maker. And now they've managed to lobby insurance companies and even the government to pay often for
Mhm.
these. If you're in the military and you feel like you want to transition, the military pays for it.
Yep,
So this is a cash cow for
for
people.
sure.
So of course, if they're only motivated by power, perversion, or money, they're not going to go back, and they really don't care, what they're doing to other people, or who is harmed in the meantime. um and as, one person in the comments just pointed out, they become lifetime
Yes,
patients.
lifelong patience,
So there's
exactly. Even
you
just the
you
hormones is enough. Like, even just the hormones is enough to send you into being a lifelong patient, especially if
right.
you get them on puberty blockers when they're young, then they're for sure going to be lifelong patients.
Ugh. Now, that comment, though, it did remind me two things that I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show. One is, if you have a question for Pamela, you can ask it in the comments. And if it's respectful and germane, then I'll, excuse me, I'll put it up on the screen, and, we can all see the question, and then you can answer it. So if you have any questions for Pam, sorry, then we'll go ahead and put that up. Just put it in the comments. Excuse me. And then another is, you are going to start sending out signed copies of your book, right?
Yeah, I need to coordinate that, but yeah, someone asked me, uh, individually. I'm gonna do that individually. If it gets too much, then I'm not gonna be able to handle it because I don't have like an online store set up for that. But if there,
Right.
I can do a handful of them, and then I'm
That would
also
be a
just
good problem, though.
right, and I'm gonna look at trying to do some in-person events where I can do, sell or even give away signed copies
Oh,
at
that'd be
actual
neat.
speaking events.
Yeah, it would be neat. So what we want to do is, we're going to do a little contest. If you're watching live, what's the code word? What do we want them to say? What do we want
Oh
them to
gosh.
comment?
I don't know.
Jägermeister.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So if you can figure out how to spell Jägermeister
Oh, I don't
and
even know.
no,
Uh-oh. Yeah, I hope you
we'll have
guys
to
know.
spell check everybody. Um, but if somebody would like to enter to win a signed copy of Pamela's book, which
I have
is
my
a
proof
practical
copy here.
response to gender distress, tips and tools for families. It's a great book. I got mine. It was, the timing was great. I found out I think we messaged each other, and the next day your book was released. So I ordered it from Amazon and got it the next day.
That's
And
great.
and I'm almost done with it. But
It's
it's
not
been a
very
busy week.
long.
So
For people to know, it's not
no,
very
yeah.
long. And it has a
It's
lot of
it's
pictures in it too. So, like, I just, it's funny. I just opened up to the autistic symbol that
right.
Pride has to demonstrate how they are pushing it onto autistic people. But I have lots of images and drawings and things like that. So it's not all text. So it's kind of an
Um,
easy read.
so we do have a couple questions. Veronica, is there a
Yes,
list somewhere?
there's a couple lists.
Okay, is that in
Of
the book, or that's a
yes,
different resource?
no, actually, the very end of the book has I worked my butt off to get as many resources as I could on there. I kept adding them. I was driving my, like, formatter person crazy because I kept emailing her new things that I'd find or remember. Um, but I'll just name a couple that are the main ones that I can think of off the top of my head. There's a website called therapyfirst.org. They used to be called GETA, gender exploratory therapists, and they just changed the name to just sound more broad and have less of gender attached to their name. But Therapy First is a list of therapists who have decided are okay with putting their names out there for parents or anyone to um, see a therapist that will not simply affirm and do exploratory therapy, which is just normal therapy. This isn't even, that big of a deal. And then
Right.
there are two, if you happen to be conservative or you just don't mind seeing a therapist that happens to be conservative, who usually work with all kinds of people and don't even tell people they're conservative, but there are two websites that have a list of conservative therapists. So one is called conservativecounselors.com, and then the other one is called conservativetherapist.com. So you can
Okay.
find people that have more conservative leanings. Some of them have more incorporate more religion in their work if that's something that's important to you. So those are some places to look. And then, yeah, at the back of my book, there are other resources. There's an organization called GenSpect. I believe they're .org, genspect.org. I get it mixed up whether it's .org or .com, but they're one of the big websites, and they have therapists that work with people. Um, I'm just looking actually in the back of my thing. In the UK, there's a group called Thoughtful Therapists, and I think, yeah, thoughtfultherapist.org. And there's also a group of therapists. I don't know if they're listed as in practice, but they're just therapists that are just, I guess, anti-woke, and they're called
Right.
critical. What are they called? Critical anecdote therapists? No, I'm getting the name wrong. But there are actually a lot out there. Um, Many of them are, if you look at my Instagram, I actually have a resources section in my highlights. You can go through that. And then also in the back of my book, all these websites are listed.
Yeah, and we have in the description of the video some links to your website and your Instagram and stuff like that too, so people
Yeah, and I
can
have
find all of that.
resources in for, like, some of the stuff on my website's behind a paywall, but the resources is not. So if you go to the tab where it says resources, you can find several of these websites.
Okay. Now somebody asked, is this your
Oh,
how
it's
do
on
you get
Amazon.
it's on Amazon. I
Yeah,
want
it's
to okay.
exclusively on Amazon. I'm a newbie on this. I'm the first time author, so I'm learning how to get it maybe on other platforms. So I just learning the ins and outs of that. So to get it on other platforms, I have to write a little bit of an edition and make it a second edition, so it's not the same book, and then I'm allowed to put it on other platforms. So that's going to happen probably in a few months. But for right now, it's exclusive on Amazon. So yeah, if you search for the name or even I think my name, you can find it, A Practical Response to Gender Distress, and it's like this pink and blue cover. it's been on the top of the teen LGBTQ list, which is kind of fun.
Huh.
I don't know how these rankings work, but if you look under teen LGBTQ books, I've been in the top 5 since I released it. Sometimes in number 1. Woo!
Oh, nice. It would
Yeah,
be neat if some curious teens were reading it and
yeah.
kind of getting to, because they might recognize some of the manipulative behavior that we'll talk about here in just a second. So, um,
But yeah, maybe you
all
can
right.
put that link in there too. It's, the Amazon link. You can post that. But yeah,
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's on Amazon.
Okay, yes. Well, I'll edit the show notes after to include that, so people will be able to click there and
And then you
purchase
can
it as
find it through
well.
my social media too. So I have an Instagram. I'm known as the Truthful Therapist. So if you Google the Truthful Therapist in my name, you'll find lots of things. I have a Substack. I have a Instagram page. I have a Twitter page. I have a YouTube. Um, but it's linked up to all those things. So Twitter and Instagram is in the top of my link tree. So if you look on my social media, you can find the link that way too.
Okay, cool. And it's something I recently discovered about Substack. If you have the app on your phone, you can there's a little play button and it will read the article to you.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I
I mean,
didn't
it's
even know
just a
that.
robotic voice for right now, but I consume a lot of my podcasts and things like that, like when I'm driving to and
Right, when
fro.
you're doing
So
things. Yeah.
right, so that was handy. Once I found that I could just hit that and listen. So you can read Pamela on Substack, or you can listen to a robotic voice reading her article,
And I
whatever.
just I just put out a section on my Substack of the book, a little sample, which is
Okay.
about that. The sample is really probably one of the most important points because it's used as a weapon, which is how the trans activists lead people to believe that if they don't affirm someone's transgender identity, that they will kill themselves.
Mm,
So I debunk that. I talk about why that's a lie, why that's emotional manipulation, why it's not clinically sound to do that because you're simply putting that idea in someone's head, especially a vulnerable person who might have suicidal thoughts. And so if you tell them they're not going to get their way, then you're teaching them that to go ahead and make a suicide threat or even an attempt to show everybody how serious they are about becoming transgender, and then everyone's kind of has their hands tied. So it's a
right.
lot of manipulation there, and the trans act they get taught to say that online. There are influencers that teach kids to say this to professionals and teach them to say this to their parents. So of course you've got a vulnerable kid who's or maybe already having mental health issues, and then you tell everyone you're going to kill yourself, and then people are afraid, and then they do what the kid wants as opposed to what's actually best for that kid.
Right. And you cover that in your book too, the chapter called Emotional Blackmail.
Yeah, so that I
And
I put that in my Substack, so that's out there for free if you
okay.
want to read that without buying the book first.
And the line, it's a specific line. I've heard it all over the place too. Would you rather have a live trans or a dead, or
Right.
how, like
Yeah,
they
would you rather
dead?
have a dead daughter or a living son?
Yes, that's
Yeah, I
it.
know. It
And
took me a
I'm
while to
like,
get it straight too.
right, right. And
But yeah,
it's
they're trained to say that. Um, that's actually my line in the trailer for the movie I'm in, where
okay.
yeah, it's really true. We are trained to say that, and it goes against all of our clinical ethics. It's basically inducing personality disorder behaviors is what we're doing. And I was trained in dialectical behavioral therapy, and which is the type of therapy that's used for people who have higher suicidal behaviors. And what dialectical behavioral therapy teaches is to help people learn how to ask for help in a way that's not threatening suicide. Because it gives you what you want in the short term, and unfortunately these are kids, so they're going to go by what they get in the short term, but the lesson there is they're not really going to have real connections, they're not really going to feel fulfilled, they're just going to get this short term relief or short term, the sugar rush kind of what they want, as opposed to having a real relationship or having someone be there for them because they are a good friend, not because they're afraid that you're going to kill yourself if they
Right.
decide to not call back or something.
And what's the name of the movie you mentioned?
Oh, so yeah,
Dis
I'm in several
disconnected.
documentaries, but the one I was referencing, it's called Gender Transformation: The Untold
Okay.
Realities, and it's via the Epic Times, and
Oh, yeah.
it's a $4 subscription, but you can just pay the $4 and then cancel, and it's really, really good. The Epic
I won't tell
Times.
them you said that.
No, they'll say that too, it's okay. The Epic Times is known to be more right wing and more conservative. However, this film is very apolitical. The director, he's a Swedish guy. He's not even American. And it doesn't involve any politics. It just talks about families. It's a docudrama, which I think is really special. So it has actors in it, and it plays out a real life story, a real life, unfortunately, tragic story of a California family that was harmed by this whole gender thing. And
Okay.
it's really emotional, but it really sets the message in that this is not all just about acceptance and love, that it really is harmful and why.
And Veronica asked again where you can get it. So if you just Google, it's EPOCH,
And then
Epic
there's a
Times.
website too. It's you can actually go to gendertransformation.com, and that's a website specifically for the film, but then you're paying the subscription to Epic Times.
Right.
So yeah, EPOCH, Epic.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, and but yeah, gendertransformation.com, you can find it.
Okay. Now there's a couple ways that I'm hearing that this works its way into our kids. One is through the social contagion aspect of it, and the other is sometimes therapists actually plant the idea in their heads.
Mhm.
Um, Talk a little bit about the the social contagion of it, like and this will lead us into a little conversation about the autism connection as well. Why do you think it is that kids are getting this idea that they need to transition, and then how is that affirmed online, and the social contagion of it just kind of takes over?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many influences. I feel like we don't even realize it because we're so inundated by it now. And I do give some examples in the book about that. But you think about in politics, and on the White House had the trans flag on it. Lots of movies and reality TV shows feature it. And of course, online is probably the biggest space. It used to be, I think, Tumblr and Reddit were the big places. Now it's TikTok and Instagram. But there are all these different online platforms or ways for kids to get basically indoctrinated into believing that they were born in the wrong body, or believing that if they became trans, that it will solve all of their problems. And then they also learn what to do and what to say to manipulate the adults around them to get them on board with the trans identity. So there are so many different places. Then, of course, in schools, lots of teachers are buying into this. There are trans flags all over the schools across the country. And, it's just everywhere. So, and then among their peer groups, and of course, we're talking about young people, teenagers, who that's just the nature of the beast, right? That they copy each other. I mean, you
Right.
could go to like think about hula hoops, and it doesn't always have to be a bad thing we're copying each other, but there are trends and we follow trends. When I say it's a trend, the trans people hate me for it because they want to believe that it's real for them, but for the most part, it's a trend.
Right.
Sometimes it's a trend because to cope with some really painful feelings. So it's not like a hula hoop trend, which is maybe more fun, but for some people, I think it is a game and fun. I observe that with the kids I work with. When I was working at a teen program, the pronouns were just this big game for them, and it was a ritual. And so we're just inundated by it. And then the adults either think, well, it's not a big deal, and they go along with it just because they don't recognize the harm of it, or they're really pushing it, and they really influence the kids, and they really reward kids who say that they are a they them or something like that. So
Right.
of course, kids notice that they're getting attention, they're getting noticed for having a different pronoun. So why wouldn't they go on board with that? So that's a one thing. The other big connection I'll say is a lot of like the social justice culture. So it's more common among white kids. And my belief around that is they've been told that they are, just systemically racist people just by how they were born. And these are kids and they don't want to feel like they're bad people. And they also watch how people of other, minority status get more attention, or they even get out of tests, or they get special privileges. So the one way they can opt in to getting those kinds of privileges is to become trans. So
Right.
that's another big influence of how the like sort of critical race theory and queer theory interact with each other.
Right.
So there's so
So
many different influences.
now, is that not the epitome of privilege, though? That your life is so good that you create this marginalized identity and then that somehow elevates your status among your
Yeah.
peers, and then the adults in your life all coddle you because they have to walk on eggshells around you. um, and the thing that frustrates me the most is the adults in their lives who should be teaching them to cope and be more resilient play into it, and that just makes everything worse. I mean,
Exactly.
and not just the day to day. With pronouns, you suggest that we not entertain that at all.
I do.
Uh, right. So in that would I would liken that to telling someone who's anorexic that yes, indeed they are. Okay, we'll call you fatty. Okay, that's your new name. It's not true. So what's your take on that? Are we enforcing this by entertaining that?
Yeah, I think people just think it's innocent. They don't think it's a big deal. Like, what's the harm in the pronouns? So I talk a little bit more about how there really is true harm. That we're hurting kids, especially who don't know any different. They don't know a world where we weren't changing our genders every other millisecond, and where they don't know if their friend is going to be a boy or a girl in the next hour. Like, that's creating a lot of anxiety for kids. And we wonder why kids are unstable and not sitting still and having all these issues. Well, if you tell them that everyone and everything around them can change at any moment, and everything, and they're not grounded in truth, that will create anxiety for kids. That's just one reason. I list several. And the other big one that I think is really important is just the safety of it, especially for girls. Like, they learn that anybody could be anything, then somebody dangerous could invade a safe space. And
Mm,
so there's just a lot of dangers to this. I think people don't realize. I think they think it's innocent and fun, like a little game. But it's not that innocent and fun if you really think about it. But
right.
they don't give you the chance to think about it, and it is fun and it feels fun. That's just something. It feels like something doesn't mean it is.
Well, and I think kids, they're not thinking long term either. You play into this now, and then you grow out of it, and people still remember that. The internet now is forever.
Right.
So um, the powers that be can change history overnight on the internet, but something that you said on Twitter 10 years ago could come back to bite
Right.
you. And we're seeing increasingly HR departments saying they don't even look at resumes that have pronouns on them and things like that. So I don't think they realize long term what they're doing to themselves. One of the big reasons why I asked you to come on was I started to see more of a connection between uh, folks on the autism spectrum and this whole transgender phenomenon. What have you found as far as the statistics involved in that?
Yeah, there's a huge percentage of autistic people who are identifying as trans. I was just looking at some articles just before this. It said 1 in 6 trans identified people are on the autistic spectrum. That was an NPR article. It's interesting because in the article they don't question it. Well, they say they don't know why, but they act like it's just an organic reason, but they don't explore it any further. So they just can use it again, kind of like this, you know, s- like human rights issue. Like, we just need to cater to this instead of questioning, well, maybe there are certain things about people who are autistic that might gravitate towards I'd call it the marketing of trans and the culture of trans and the enticement of trans. So I'll go through a few of the things that I think are pretty obvious. I mean,
Okay.
the number one thing is people who are autistic tend to struggle socially. So what trans does is it promises you that you have a new family, you have a glitter family, and that you are now becoming your true self. And there's a lot of superficial, what they call it, love bombing. So they get all of this attention for being trans, even if their behaviors aren't always, always socially appropriate. But when you're trans, you kind of get this shield. So that's very attractive for autistic people. And if they're just suffering and they feel alone and then they feel like they're really a part of something, it's is obviously that's very enticing. And I don't blame them for wanting to be a part of this new community that they feel a part of, with lots of colors and fun and music and activities and days of celebration. So that's one of the biggest reasons. The other main reason is autistic people, especially teens, they tend to be more online. And the way they get indoctrinated into this ideology is online. So it's not just on social media, that's one of the biggest places, but also like in gaming. So a lot of gamers tend to be uh, on the like trans. And then being online so much is a good way to um, end up being a little dissociated from your body. You kind of live in this sort of avatar. And trans is really a way of dissociation from your body because you believe now that your body is like a vessel and it's inconsequential and you can just change it by, some magic hormones and surgeries. It's almost like a form of magical thinking. And I mean, you can get really dark with it and recognize that this is a form of transhumanism.
Mm,
And so, but when you're on a video game and you get to be an avatar, and they have now a lot of these video games where you can choose to be a trans character. They have ones where they have ones with mastectomy scars, the scars on the chest.
yeah.
So you get to really identify and feel like you're walking in the world as as a trans person, as these characters. And I think it's harder for autistic people to separate real life from, the virtual world.
Mm,
And maybe they don't want to because it's safer, right? Um, those are some reasons. The other thing is in general, autistic people tend to have more rigid thinking, so it's harder to convince them of these more abstract ideas of like, well, no, like this is what real self acceptance looks like, and it becomes a little abstract. And once you've convinced them that they're born in the wrong body, it's much harder to talk them out of it because they get locked into an idea, right? I mean, you probably know more about this than me. Like once you get locked into an idea, especially if you are on the spectrum, it's harder to pull that person out, right?
right. That fixation. And it's
Yeah.
funny because years ago we put out a blog post about healthy versus unhealthy fixations.
Mhm.
And we got a lot of heat for that. And it didn't make any sense to me because if you're if you're fixated on photography as an autistic individual and you do everything you can to be the best photographer you can and you just really excel at it, then you may make a career out of it. You certainly are occupying yourself with something productive. If your fixation is water, then that's not so good, especially if you're, a young child. A lot of autistic kids drown because
Mhm.
they are attracted to water.
Okay.
So that's an unhealthy fixation, right? So the fact that we would suggest that we would try to turn a child away from what we would consider an unhealthy fixation, we got a lot of pushback for that.
Mm.
And like one of the things that I said was, if your kid wants to run into traffic, you stop your kid from running into traffic.
Right.
And if that's their fixation, then it's unhealthy. And you just have to be able to differentiate. You can support a fixation that could be productive or helpful or healthy for them, but you have to decide which is which,
Mhm.
right? So this would, and I can see a pattern here where there's anxiety, there's social anxiety. An autistic kid might feel just out of place, and then they find this online community
And
and
they
they start to
feel
tell
so
them
good about it. Yeah.
and they start to tell them, well, it's because you're in the wrong body, right?
Right.
Maybe they're gay, and the person says, no, the community says you're not gay, you're attracted to boys or you're attracted to girls because you're in the wrong body. And
That's a
then
whole other thing, like, the gay and lesbian or kids that would grow up to be gay and lesbian, they're being targeted because oftentimes they don't fit into, like, a gender stereotypes, and if they are more of a tomboy or maybe a boy who more likes to play with trucks or more effeminate, then they're told they're born in the wrong body, but really they're a kid that might just grow up to be gay. So that's why Gays
right,
Against Groomers has become quite a powerful voice because they feel as though they would have been um, transitioned. They call this the real conversion therapy because they feel like they're converting gay kids or kids that would grow up to be gay.
right. And that boggles my mind how people in the community start to speak out against this, and they're immediately labeled right wing, fascist,
And that's
bigot, all of
intentional.
that. Right. It's pretty wild.
Shut them down.
Excuse me.
The other thing about autistic people is the sensory stuff. So, like, I've seen some stuff online where it's like, if you don't like wearing certain clothes, you might be trans. If you don't like to wear fancy clothes. Well, most people don't like wearing fancy clothes. That it's uncomfortable. But an autistic person who has more sensory sensitivity really probably doesn't like to wear fancy clothes. So, the sensory stuff, or maybe they don't like to be touched. Maybe they're struggling with approaching or dating with the opposite sex. So becoming like a lot of boys, for example, it's attractive to say they're a girl trapped in a boy's body, and then they get to talk to the girls, like because the girls are all nice to him now,
Right.
because now a trans woman or a trans girl, and they never were able to talk to the girls. It's like a shield. Someone I used the metaphor like a spacesuit, like their trans spacesuit.
Mm.
They got to be in that, and they're able to interact with the world much easier because they have this sort of shield. So yeah, if you don't know how to approach someone of the opposite sex, or someone who you'd want to have a relationship with, and being autistic adds that extra barrier sometimes, that's another reason why this could be attractive or might lead someone to believe they're trapped in the wrong body.
And I think I've seen two interactions online where once they explore that possibility, oh, you're so brave. Oh,
That
you're
too.
awesome. You're
I
part of the
love the
community.
reward.
We love you so much. We're here for you. You go from feeling awkward and not fitting in to having 5,000 people
Exactly.
online
I call
telling
that love
you,
bombing. That's the
yeah,
love bombing.
and
Yeah.
who wouldn't, be attracted to that if you're.
Especially if you've been invisible or you felt really invisible for so long, right? I mean, it makes sense.
So what speaking of how therapists and teachers are manipulating, I've also heard of stories where the therapists themselves or teachers are planting the idea just like
Mhm.
people are on the community. So we went over, you have a couple lists where people can find good therapists, but I'll tell you an experience that I had. I asked his permission. My son, um, he went, he was a freshman in high school, went on spring break. Everything went shut down for COVID
Mm.
2020, right? So he's excited. He's a freshman, already nervous. Everything's changing. Um, Now all of a sudden he thinks he's an adult because he's in high school. And, but he goes on spring break and they shut everything down. They went to Zoom and all of that. And he was just stuck in the house. And I'd say for the first, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks, we fell for it. We were wearing masks to the store and bleaching our bananas and
Yeah,
all of
me
that.
too.
And yeah, and then I pretty quickly realized that this just, you could see the trends. It turned out I didn't think, I'm no medical expert, but I do try to look at the data and make informed decisions. And what I was seeing and what people were experiencing wasn't adding up to what they were telling us on the creepy COVID
Yeah,
constant, So we started snapping out of it, but it didn't change that school was shut down.
right.
So he became a little anxious. I mean, heck, they were telling us that we're all going to die and the world is,
Right.
all
I
this.
can imagine being a kid don't going through that.
Yeah. And he was very anxious and some depression set in. Um, and we did what good parents do, because that's what we've also been trained to do, is you got to get your kids in therapy if something like this is
Oh,
going on. So we sought somebody that we trusted. We got a referral. And I'll tell you, it was the weirdest thing. From my experience, we had one conversation with this therapist to get things started. It was nothing like what you describe we should expect in the book from talking to a therapist, doing an intake, really getting our opinion or any of that about what was
yes.
going on. He didn't ask any of the relevant questions that one you would think would ask. He saw that therapist on Zoom for
Mhm.
probably a year and a half or
I'm against
two.
the whole Zoom therapy thing. That's a whole other issue.
Right. For about a year and a half or 2 years, actually. And I'll tell you what I observed. We never talked to him again until we set up an appointment and paid for a session.
Ugh,
He never reached out to tell us how he was doing, what he needed, what he was struggling with. There was this shroud of secrecy. And
yeah.
we naively thought, well, you have that therapist
Right.
patient relationship, and it's not, he would, if something was really serious, he would tell us. But what we saw was the day before a session, he would just be distraught, crabby,
Hmm,
more irritable, not better. And then a couple days after the session, he would be more irritable and this and that. Now,
interesting.
thankfully, the therapist was just not that effective. He wasn't trying to lead him astray or plant any,
Yeah.
thoughts in his head, but I could see where it could happen. So finally, we had this session with him, and he just sat there it was a 50-minute session. And while my wife and I were talking about some of our concerns, he just sat there nodding his head. And we were like, what tools and processes are you giving our son to help to deal with this? And what tools and processes can you suggest for us to
Yeah.
help support him?
Good questions.
And he was basically, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing fine. And I was
So what's
like,
the
no,
point?
it's not, it's not fine. It's worse. He developed a um, relationship with a girl in another state who turned out to be toxic. So he's
Oh,
bummed out about that. And it was, everything was just getting worse. And finally, I talked to him and I said, it doesn't appear to be helping. What tools are, I asked him the same question, what
yeah.
tools or processes? And he said, nothing. He just lets me vent.
Yeah,
And I'm
that's
like,
not therapy.
no, I go, that's what friends are for. I'm not paying this guy to do this
Yes.
anymore. So we stopped. And I'll
It could
tell
have
you,
even made it worse. I mean, just
right.
that could have made your son actually dwell on the negative and not
What do they call
yeah.
trauma informed care? Is that kind of an
Well,
aspect of that?
trauma-informed care is now like a charged phrase that I think is being misused, but I mean, traditionally, trauma-informed care is when someone has trauma to recognize that, so when they're doing certain behaviors to acknowledge that so you can help them within that context. But I don't think that was trauma-informed care, I think that
Okay.
was just
Well,
a
it's
lazy
like basically,
therapist.
it seems like they tell them the slightest thing these days is trauma, and
Yeah,
then
and
they
there's
just
that problem.
dwell on that, dwell on that. And there's never moving forward. It's,
That's a
let's
big
recognize the
problem.
trauma. Let's see how it harmed us. Let's see how it affected our behavior. And then what are we going to do about it to put it behind us? And that's the piece that we never saw happening.
And then we're
Um,
calling things trauma that I don't think
that
are
aren't
trauma. I mean,
right.
it he was going through I mean, well, the whole world was going through a lockdown, so I wouldn't call that normal, but for the most part, I mean, he had supportive parents and he maybe had a struggle with a relationship and a lot you don't I think it's unhelpful to just label everything trauma that's upsetting or disturbing to somebody because then they get stuck there and think they have this whole trauma they have to overcome as opposed to looking at it as life stressors or life challenges and things to work through and that th're not something that's going to traumatize you for the rest of your life.
So what? Um, we recognized that a lack of communication was a red flag, right? So
For sure.
once he stopped going, stopped having those sessions, he broke it off with the girlfriend that was toxic from another state, and he started communicating with us more. And our relationship grew better, and he started coming out of the funk. And of course,
That's
um,
interesting. Yeah,
we're in a
that's
more
a
free
really
state.
blatant example of how therapy doesn't help
Right.
sometimes.
And well, we also are in a free state because we opened up a lot sooner than other
Okay.
states did. So um
Jealous.
he
I was
the
in
rest of that school
California.
year he wasn't in I'd say the first couple months of the following school year, they had given them a choice, be in school or still do Zoom, and he thought it'd be good to still do Zoom, but then he decided no, he wanted to go back. And so once he was socialized again
Mhm.
and speaking with us, and our relationship started improving again, things really changed. And now he's graduated and he's doing great.
Great.
But it was I hear some of these other stories and I'm just like, praise God, things turned out so
Yeah.
differently for us than some of the other tragic things that I hear. So, what, other than that lack of communication, what else can parents look for if they're not communicating well with the therapist?
Well, I mean, I've gotten kind of sour on a lot of therapists. Not all of them, of course, but a lot of them, especially those who work with kids. That is the most important thing, is to make sure that you as a parent is involved, and this doesn't mean you need to be in the room throughout every session, but it means that you should be a part of the initial phase to give the therapist information about your child, about what your concerns are, about excuse me, what happened in early development, any health issues, things that a child couldn't articulate himself. Like your son couldn't tell the therapist when he walked and talked, and whether he had trouble, a health issue when he was a baby, or like all of those sorts of things are really important clinical information to be able to make a solid assessment if there are behavioral issues. And therapists are just kind of skipping that part, and that's negligence in my opinion. And
Mm,
then once the therapist learns that information, hopefully, then they should be in touch with you to find out how things are going. And, how is the treatment going? What First of all, they should set some kind of treatment goals, like something, like it could be client set. Like your son could have said something like, "Well, I want to feel less down, or I want to, find more friends, or something like that." It could be broad, but they need to have some kind of treatment goal. And you might have some goals, or you might have some concerns, like maybe he's moping around the house, or he's not listening to you at home and not doing the chores that you've asked him to do, or you're noticing his behaviors of concern. So you'd like to be able to have these things be addressed, not maybe not directly, but maybe whatever the underlying issues are around that. And
right.
so the therapist needs to talk to you to find out if these behaviors are getting better or worse. And it sounds like they were getting worse in your son's situation, but the therapist had no idea, or maybe didn't care. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't know. I
yeah,
We've thought it was odd that surrounding the sessions, like the day before and a couple days after, and that's what made me start to think, if he's just having him rehash whatever it is that's bumming him out, of
yeah,
course that
that's
he's
not
going to feel
therapy.
worse, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
the
not
fact
therapy.
that
Who needs that?
he never reached out to us to say, hey, he was in communication with us to a certain extent because we were paying the bill,
Right.
but he would reach out to go, hey, is it okay to charge the card? But other than that,
That's not.
we didn't really get much out of him. So we were very thankful when our son agreed that it wasn't, he didn't think it was necessary. And we let him know that, we would find someone else, whatever the case is, that we wanted to support him in that if he still had that need. But he said, no, it's not really helping. Let me go for a little while without it. Now that he's back in school and broke up with the girl and all of that, things just kind of started to,
Yeah,
correct themselves. But
that's
yeah,
good.
we were not impressed.
Yeah, I'm glad you stopped, and I'm glad it didn't go worse. Because
Y-
yeah, and come on, let's be real here. Kids don't always tell the truth. They need to hear from the parents what's really going on, or at least hear another point of view. Also, like, you guys, the parents, the families have a direct impact on a kid. So it's therapeutic for the clinician needs to have that information by talking to you just to get to know you. Like, let's just say you were a difficult parent, or you were really hard on him, or you were doing something that was causing some kind of issue. They would need to talk to you to find out what's really going on. Like, I've had that experience where I've talked to a mom and I'd be like, oh, now I get
no, I
why
see.
this child is having some communication issues at home. I mean, it's not even it's it just gives you that clinical information. It's like if you're feeling a certain emotion talking to that parent, then you you would might learn something. But then also you learn, oh, well, these parents are really supportive, or these parents are really doing what they need to do. So that's important to know. If there's a sibling that's maybe struggling at home, maybe a special needs kid. I mean, this is a podcast about autism. Perhaps you have an autistic kid at home and a non-autistic kid at home, and then this is very common where the kid who's not special needs ends up identifying as trans because they get less attention. And this
Mm,
is a way for them to be noticed. So if a therapist is working with a kid that's suddenly trans and they're not a good therapist, and they just simply affirm them and say because they're born in the wrong body, as opposed to recognizing that perhaps there's some family dynamics that have something to do with this, then they're not doing their job.
right. But and as you mentioned earlier, and you have a whole chapter about in the book, therapists are trained to
Yeah,
manipulate the
they
parents
are.
as well. And is that just part of the cash cow aspect
I
of
think
it, or
so.
the power, the perversion of the money? They manipulate the parents so that they have more control over the child.
I think most therapists don't know that they're manipulating, but they're trained
Mm,
to. I think because it's framed in this "it sounds nice" scenario. So, yeah, I talk about how I tended just so I could sort of spy or know what's going on in currently and how therapists are being trained, because this is not how I was trained. Went to school in the '90s and the 2000s, so this was not a thing back then. So I'm even relatively recently, it wasn't that pervasive, like just 5 years ago. So when I went on that disability and I came back, things were very different. So I wanted to go to some trainings and see what they were doing. And in this one training I went to, and now I've actually been to two, but the one I wrote about in the book, they manipulate parents to affirm their kids' trans identity, even if the parent's not comfortable with it, because they say that means they basically tell the parent that that's making them a loving and accepting parent. Like, they're not
mm.
being loving and accepting otherwise. And they even use the stages of grief. So they say to the parent, well, you're just grieving your cis child,
Oh my gosh.
and you need to accept that your child is trans, and this is the reality. And so they're doing it in this like kind of compassionate manner, like, I'm going to be really kind to you and help you grieve this horrible, difficult loss of your family, as opposed to the parent recognizing that there's something off here. That one, even if we believed in this myth that there's some kind of born in the wrong body thing, th- to address that with hormones and surgeries is something that's going to give that kid lifelong physical health issues. So to not even acknowledge that that's something the parent should be concerned about, and for a parent to worry about making a decision to sterilize their own child before the child can consent to that,
Mm.
those are obviously natural feelings and things to be hesitant about. But the therapist will say that they're just grieving and they need to do the right thing. And to be a good and loving parent, you would accept your trans child as they are, as their authentic selves.
And like you've said, and I agree. I mean, therapists are not bad people. They're not. They didn't set out to
I don't think
manipulate
so.
parents and hurt children.
They're
They
naive, though.
right. That's where, and it's there's part of that. Many of them are empaths. Many of them just really want to serve others and
That's it.
care about others, and they see these kids as very vulnerable. And often, especially if their parents are more conservative,
Mhm.
They see them also as a victim of that conservative or religious or oppressive or however they look at it background. So there's an aspect of them wanting to rescue,
That's
but
it.
that's where parental rights come in. And
Mhm.
some of the conversations that I've seen about parental rights, especially from like Canada, the government has more right to your kids than you do. I remember watching one of the politicians in Canada recently saying parents don't have rights, children have rights.
No, I know. That's where
And
we're
I'm
headed.
like,
That's what they're doing. It's very scary.
it is. And it's I think Jordan Peterson said people are too dumb to carry on a conspiracy of this magnitude,
Yeah,
but it's
right?
definitely a
Can't make this stuff
conspiracy of
up.
evil, right? But it's definitely a conspiracy of evil. There is a direction that we're going into collectively, and
Yeah,
I think a lot of people are pouring gas on the fire, but they're very well intentioned.
yeah,
And that's where parents really have to be vigilant. I mean, if
yeah,
you took your kid to a doctor and they broke his leg every time you took him, you would you would start to figure out that he's not the best for your
right.
kid. But with this particular issue, it's they come at it like you said, manipulative and emotional blackmail. So
And
you would be responsible for that kid's suicide if you didn't affirm
right.
these things, and that's just such a wacky way to look at it because there's not enough data for them
There's
to say
no
that.
data. 0.
There is enough data to say that often kids that struggle with this type stuff have other issues that are underlying that
Yes.
could still lead to potential self-harm and suicide and things like that. So I think that parents just need to be better informed, and that's where books like yours are great.
That's what my goal of my book. My goal of my book is not to tell you what to do, but to give you information and to empower you, and give you ideas. And I don't even like. There's a section where I talk about how to talk to your kid who's identified as trans, and it has a lot of good suggestions. But I also emphasize that I can't give you a script. I want you to think for yourself. I want you to think about what would connect with you and your child, and to use your own discretion. And that's really my message is don't blindly trust experts, even me. Don't blindly trust. Take information in and think for yourself, and you know what's best for your own kid.
Right. Great. Well, I don't want to keep you. I know you've probably done what 30 or 40
I don't know.
podcasts in the last month, so I don't want to keep you too long. Is there anything particular about the book or your other work that you wanted to mention but you didn't have the opportunity to so far?
I don't know. I mean, I think what sets there are a couple other books on the same subject, and they are listed in the back. One's by a woman named Miriam Grossman.
Mhm.
Another one is by therapists from that GenSpect organization that I mentioned earlier, and they, I think, are also have rich information. But I think what makes mine different, we'll just say, is it's written very very plain, simple, easy, and approachable language.
Mhm.
So if you're someone that's kind of overwhelmed by the subject, if you're in the thick of it with your family, or someone who's in the thick of it, it's just much more approachable. It gives you all the information you need without being bogged down by a lot of clinical language or even the history of the transgender movement. I actually don't go into that. There are other books that have that information.
Right.
So, yeah, it's just for people who are looking for something that's just like in the title, something very practical. It's a practical,
It is, and that's
yeah,
what I appreciated about it. Like, it was I read half of it sitting in a coffee shop. It was just it's very accessible, it's easy to understand, but you don't get overly technical, but you do bring receipts. I mean,
yes,
you cite some studies, you have some graphs, there's some, pretty moving artwork in there from some detransitioners and from folks who've gone through this personally. There's some good personal stories in there as well that really make you think. So I really appreciate the book, and I appreciate all that you're doing for this community. And I wish you the best, much success. I'd
thank you.
like to hear more from you, and I'm looking forward to the podcast that you're on with Stephanie Wynn, some kind of therapist.
I
I
think
always
it's
enjoy
gonna
her
be
work
next
too.
week. I think it's coming
Okay.
out next week. I'm not sure when she's releasing it, but we recorded it about a month ago, but she holds on to them. So,
So
and
you
it's
know
a
what
good
your
group.
next step is the your own podcast. That's going to be
Yeah, people say that. I don't think I have it in me.
good. Well,
I am good
once
at Instagram though. I make funny things on Instagram. I need to repost some of the stuff I've done. Like originally when I was really just waking up to this and I thought affirmative therapy was so insane. I did a little skit with myself where I'm a goldfish and I'm getting therapy and I told my therapist to affirm me as a goldfish and call me Goldie and please don't use my dead name. And then the therapist hands me, the goldfish a bowl of water. Here's your bowl of water.
oh, I feel like I've seen that.
Did you see
I've
that? So
I
that's like
think
kind of my personality. That's why I'm good with teens and kids.
right, right.
So
So now you do though some one-on-one. I know you're not a big fan of Zoom type stuff,
I do with
but
parents.
you do one-on-one like Zooms with parents, but
Yeah.
not with kids.
Like it's not ongoing. I don't call it therapy. I call it consultations because I wouldn't do, you're welcome. I wouldn't do ongoing therapy on Zoom. But what I'll do is a consultation. If someone has questions, I'll talk to them and kind of set them in the right direction. And usually it's about empowering them.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
good. And that's, I think, one of the missing pieces of the puzzle are therapists aren't involving the parents, teachers
Mhm.
aren't involving the parents. And we need the tools to be able to talk to our kids. So, you know, especially if you're Gen X, get over it is one of our favorite. That's the biggest tool in my box is get over it. And it doesn't work with this,
Right.
there's more to it. So if you're,
Yeah, that the book has that's what's good about the book 'cause it's like I have this weird juxtaposition of personality where I guess I have that get over it personality a little bit, like tough love, but then I also still have the therapy stuff inside of me. So there's the balance of that where it's like, let's not dwell on problems, let's not overemphasize or over diagnose and that sort of thing, but also let's acknowledge when there's pain. And here are some suggestions on how we can pull them out of that pain without dwelling on it.
and that's what's important. We want resilient kids, right? We
Exactly.
don't want them to be fragile. We want them to be compassionate, merciful. We want them to care about people, but we also want them to be tough. We
And
want
believe
them,
in themselves. Like
yes.
we're not letting them try things out in the world. I think we're doing too much for them and they don't get enough independent time to work it out. The adults kind of swoop in, I think, too quickly nowadays.
hmm And social media does play such a bit. You got
Mhm.
kids therapizing, each
Oh
other.
yeah,
And
for sure.
that's just you mentioned like you have a glossary in your book so that we can kind of understand some of the language parents can, but they have talking TikTok is full of talking points and methods and patterns. And you go in there a little bit confused and you walk out with a whole playbook.
Yeah,
And as soon as you use these terms, all the adults in your life will start kissing your butt. And
exactly.
that's it. It's done from there because teenagers are pretty narcissistic as it is. And if they find a way to manipulate everyone in their life, they're going to use it.
It's in their nature. It's in all of our natures in a way. It's just probably more
Right.
pronounced when you're a teenager.
Right. Well, Pam, I really appreciate you being on today. I
Oh yeah, how do
appreciate
we
your
do the
work.
giveaway with the book? Are we
Oh,
gonna do
that's
that?
right. Actually, nobody figured out how to spell Jägermeister.
Oh,
So, yeah. So, what I'll do is after I'll look at all the comments on both
okay.
platforms, and I'll pick one and shoot them out a message so that they can get us some shipping information and all that. And then I'll get that to you so you can get out. You said you're getting some books in next week that you can
Yeah.
autograph and sign out.
I've
So,
ordered some copies, and then I can order more, but they'll just take another week or 2. When you order the
okay, cool.
author copies, apparently it takes longer than a regular order because I'm paying the author price, so they don't
Oh,
ship it right
okay.
away. They
Right,
go
right.
later in the priority.
They
So,
drag it
yeah.
out a little bit. Okay. Well, I appreciate you. And let's stay in touch. Now you're following us and we're following you
Yeah,
and
I
we're
really
going to keep in
appreciate
touch.
it.
All right.
Yeah. People can message on my website is thetruthfultherapist.org. You can email me through that. I try to answer like DMs on Instagram, but sometimes they get lost. So probably the best way would be to email me. Yeah, more people are standing up to it, but there's a lot of fear,
Yeah.
and so,
I
but it's
think
coming around.
what
I
we're
think the
going to
tides
do,
are turning.
let's
Sorry.
make Veronica our big winner because she's stuck with us from the beginning. She's been with us for the
Okay,
whole. So,
congrats, Veronica.
Veronica, yeah, you are our big winner for the autographed copy of. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, I almost held it up upside down. So it's a practical response to gender distress, tips and tools for family. It's not super long. It's an easy read. It's got some great information and very accessible. So I think you'll enjoy it. So
You deserve it.
Veronica,
You can help
if
other people
you
stand up.
yes, more people need to stand up, that's for sure. Veronica, shoot us a message through you're watching on Facebook, shoot us a message through our page with your shipping information and we'll get it out. It'll probably be about a week or 10 days because Pamela's still waiting for her copies, but we'll get you out a signed copy of the book. And you probably get it in a couple weeks. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. And you have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for watching.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Thank you everyone for watching. It's been a great episode. This is probably the most favorite one I've done so far. A very important topic, something that we need to stay educated on, not for our own sakes only, but for our kids. But also, you never know when you might be in a position to help someone else out. So if you know someone that's struggling with this topic, a friend, another family member, get them a copy of the book. You can find all the links in the show notes, and we'll add a link to Amazon so that you can purchase Pamela's book and give it away as a gift. Purchase more than one. They're not very expensive. They're very accessible, and it'll be
Because of neurobalance, my daughter can sleep through the night consistently, which hasn't happened in years, and we are so thankful.